Good evening, everyone. I am Chrissi Kelly from AbScent, and welcome to our 13th webinar in the series. We were just talking about this before we went on air. 13 is kind of an unlucky number, so we were deciding whether we should call it 12B or maybe we should go straight to 14. But either way, I'm very glad to have you here with us tonight. And my guest tonight is Dr. Duika Burges-Watson. She and I are going to be talking about how people can best manage their parosmia. So we're going to be covering a couple of topics tonight to help you make the most out of the evening. You will find, if you look into the chat bar, a link to a file, which if you click on that, it's a sort of handy reference guide to what we'll be discussing this evening. That way we don't have to share the screen, and that sometimes gets a little bit boring. So if you're interested in seeing that, you could always, you can take a look on that now. If you have questions to put to either myself or to Duika, we welcome your questions. And we've got Aiden is back with us tonight. He's got on his wireless headphones, and he is going to be looking at the Q&A bar and is going to be going through that and asking questions, interrupting. So do feel free to put your questions to us there. So I think that is enough for the housekeeping notes, and we can begin. So, Duika, thank you very much for joining us again. It's been very exciting working with you the past couple of weeks. So much is happening in the area of parosmia. And tell me a little bit about how you see the Parosmia Plan and what you think we might be able to do for patients with it.
Yes, I think it's really exciting, Chrissi. I'm really glad to be working with you because I was thinking about the fact that I probably encountered parosmia the first time about 8 years ago when I was working with head and neck cancer survivors. And we had this one woman who definitely had parosmia, and she divided her house down the middle because she couldn't stand the smell of her partner's cooking. And she literally had divided the house up. And at that particular point in time, nobody had heard this in the field that I was working in. Nobody knew the term parosmia. Nobody was familiar with it. And certainly we didn't know how to help her at the time. And it's, even though the term was coined in the 1930s, I think parosmia has been something that we have largely neglected in medical professions for a long time. So I'm really excited that we can start to think about how can we help people who are living with parosmia, and what sorts of strategies and things can they do to make life just a little bit simpler. And this is not just to apply to people with long COVID or post-COVID symptoms. There's a whole range of different people out there we know experience parosmia. So I've been working with cancer survivors. We've got some students who are working with Sjogren's syndrome. We know that this is common in acquired brain injury. So parosmia is nothing new, but certainly this is a great opportunity to do something about it and to really find some ways of helping people. So I'm thrilled.
Yeah, and finding an approach. I mean, this is the thing which is, you know, became so apparent to me as the number of cases mounted. I don't know if any of you saw on Twitter, I checked Google Trends for the use of the word parosmia, going up very rapidly. So this is something that we need to have a strategy to help these people. You know, there may be no medical interventions for parosmia, but let's find ways of making life more bearable. Mm-hmm. So we've got this document, and we've kind of broken it down, this is from the altered eating kind of approach to eating, changed eating, altered eating. So we've taken 6 of those points. They are functional approach, emotional, behavioral, sensory, cognitive, and social. And we'll be discussing a little bit about each of those points and how we can help people within the scope of each one. So Duika, let's start with functional. And we've got a couple of points down for functional. And I'm going to read them out, and then let's discuss a little bit and just see how we can draw that out a little bit and pull something out of that anybody in the audience who is affected by parosmia might be able to use to make their life a little bit more easy. So under functional, we have how are my senses today? Things are changing week by week. Be alert and be a smell and taste detective. Why don't we start with being a smell and taste detective? So what do you mean by that?
Okay, well, the thing about how we experience food is it's a fusion of all sorts of different sensory inputs. So if we are aware and understand which senses, which part of our sensory system is working okay, then we can kind of adapt eating and cooking and preparing food, knowing a little bit more about why certain things are working and certain things are not. Now, one of the things that we didn't mention, and there may be people in the audience who are unfamiliar with the term parosmia. So I think, first of all, let's just make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what parosmia is. So it is a distorted perception of smells in the presence of an odour source. So parosmia means that there is an odour source out there that's triggering a reaction in you, and most notably, they tend to be really unpleasant malodors or distorted smells that a lot of people, I don't know, you've probably heard a million different definitions of parosmia, but the one that seems to be most acceptable to people is a fruity sewerage smell. That's a very common way of describing it. So it's a very unpleasant and constant experience that you have with parosmia. But smell, while it largely governs our experience of food and eating, is not the only sense that we have when we're eating. So we have taste, which includes sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and umami. We have colour, we have temperature, we have texture, we have sound, the crunchiness of an apple or something like that. We have all of these different senses that combine together to give us the experience of the flavour of food. So our senses can vary from day to day, and I expect most people who have parosmia who are here now will probably say that it's not a stable experience.
Yes, and I think that's a very important point. And because people may not yet have tuned into that fact, they will have been turned off by something that they found revolting. I don't know, a certain kind of yogurt or a dish of some kind. And then they just won't ever go back to it. And that would be a normal thing to do if you had a healthy sense of smell where it doesn't change all the time. But it's very important if you approach a food and you're disgusted by it one day, do go back to it in a couple of weeks, because things are changing all the time. And I think this idea of you know, kind of playing with your sense of smell, always being mindful of it, being a detective, really, to sort of when you sit down and eat something, you know, take a tiny mouthful and then just sort of see what the experience is. See if you can find something new in that experience the next time around, or whenever it is that you feel that you can approach that food again. So I think that's really, you know, we called this section functional. That is just sort of the way our sense of smell and the way our experience of flavor is functioning at any given time. So that's one way that you can approach this.
And just to say, Chrissi, I think the other thing that we probably should mention is that this is not a one story. There are various stages to parosmia, and I think you've produced a fantastic document that sort of describes those different stages. But I was trying to think what the stages were, and I described them as the first stage feels completely unbearable when you suddenly find that everything just smells disgusting and it's really, really hard to cope with. And then you go through this sort of unstable period where smells can come and go and you think you're getting better, and then it sort of wafts back again. And then eventually, as the nerves regenerate, you come to a stage which we're calling the new normal, which is kind of like when coffee doesn't taste the same as it used to, but you've got kind of used to the idea of coffee with a musty overtone or something like that. So there's these different phases that you go through with parosmia as well. And I think it's really important through all of them to recognise that as we understand it at the moment, there's a need to focus on the idea that parosmia is actually your nerves regenerating. So if you can switch your mental attitude to being surprised rather than shocked at the changes, and foster this sense of curiosity about what's happening to you. So that's what I mean by being a sensory detective. How are my senses today? What's working? What isn't? How has it changed? How is it different from yesterday? One person suggested writing a diary and keeping a diary, a sort of positive diary.
Yep. Yeah, really, that's a great idea. That is a great idea. I was just thinking, and I just had my eye on something that someone put in the chat bar, and you were talking about the different phases. You know, you start off with when you're first hit with it, and everything is so strange and foreign and really horrible. If you're on the severe end of the scale, where everything smells really like sewage, that is an unbearable thing. And certainly in that phase, it is very difficult to think about color and texture and all these things that we'd like to think we could tune into. So really for those people, I mean, maybe it would be good to sort of say a few words about what can people do who have the severest forms of parosmia.
Yeah,
I realize we're kind of getting off of our carefully devised system here, but I do think that anyone who's turned up tonight because they have severe parosmia, they're really hurting, and they want to know, like, what can I do right now, because I just can't bear it anymore.
Yeah, and I think there are several things there. I mean, I've noticed on the Facebook site several people suggesting that they've lost weight rapidly because they're not eating. Or they're only eating sugary foods because they can't bear eating anything else. And I think if you've got to the point where you're having excessive weight loss, or you feel malnourished in any way at all, it's really good to seek medical advice if that's available to you. I think in the current context, finding a dietitian or a nutritionist or a GP who will talk to you is difficult, but if that's available to you, I'd really recommend it. So there is actually guidance in the UK that says that if you haven't eaten anything for more than 5 days, or you're not likely to eat anything for the next 5 days, then a GP has to talk to you about this, and they may be able to prescribe meal replacement drinks for you.
Yeah.
So there are certain ones like 40-Sip Neutral, Scandi Shake Neutral, New Ultra, Food Link Complete. These are meal replacements that can be prescribed by your GP.
Yeah, and I just want to say that for anyone in the US, those brands may not be available, but it's a question of finding something. Meal replacement shakes, you can look for that on the internet. There are also commercially available ones, which Duika and I have both tried out, that are there. This particular company does unflavored and unsweetened product to which you add water, or you could add milk or milk substitute, that if you found one that was palatable, and then you mix that up and you basically just neck it, drink it down, and that's your all the nutrients, all the proteins, carbs, everything that you need, fiber is in one glass, and you're done until the next meal. And those kind of meal replacement drinks for a day, and that's it. And I know that I have heard of extreme cases where the person in question lived for 10 years on meal replacement because they just couldn't tolerate any kind of food. So that is the best way forward if you really find yourself in this very, very critical phase. But I think that we also have to consider that this is a problem. Parosmia is, of course, it's a problem with your altered sense of smell, changing everything for you, but it very quickly becomes an emotional problem as well. Mm-hmm. And for those people, we need to help them, find the right kind of help so that they can get over that. Mm-hmm. Duika, do you want to add anything to that?
Just a couple of other additional points about the meal replacement drinks. The other thing I know, when we were working with Gwyn, who'd survived head and neck cancer and had parosmia, she discovered green smoothies. Smoothies that she made herself, and there's lots of really good sites online for how to make a smoothie. and if you make them with lots of vegetables and things in, you can actually make a good substitute for a meal replacement drink yourself at home as well. And just one other thing is, if you can't get any help from your dietitian or GP, there is actually in the UK something called freelancedietitians.org. So you can, if you can afford it, you can pay for a dietitian to help you out with that stuff. So that's one thing. The other thing that I wanted to mention just briefly was nose clips. I mean, interestingly, in the 70s, there was a paper, a research paper, where they finally came to the conclusion that the best thing that you could do when you're in that unbearable stage of parosmia is buy yourself a good nose clip,
Right.
and pop it on to eat. And I know lots of people on the Facebook site have found the swimming nose clips or any kind of nose clip really quite helpful.
Yeah, that's true. So Aidan, I think I see your finger hovering over the Q&A button. So what do you have for us?
Someone says here, I understand different ways to experience food, but when I eat something that smells so vile and I feel I'm eating my dog's poo, it does not help me to concentrate on how crunchy, cold, or colourful it is. What to do then?
Right. Well, I think that's the person who I saw in the chat bar, and I think, you know, that is a case that is repeated many times in the Facebook group, and really when it's that bad, the best things are a nose clip and unflavored protein shakes. And you know what Duika was mentioning just a minute ago about, you know, hopefully then graduating to smoothies or finding, you know, ways to incorporate other kinds of food into your diet. That is all has to be done on a case by case, taste by taste, little increments until you feel that you've found something that you can work with, and then you can build on that. So maybe you decided, and people put lists into the Parosmia Facebook group, you know, this is what I can eat now. I can eat lemon yogurt, celery, you know, cooked fish and bananas. And okay, if you know, if you've got those 4 things, well, that's better than nothing at all. And you've got to build on that. But even the person that put together that list did it with painstaking, you know, testing and finally tasting something and thinking, okay, I can live with that. Might also be worth mentioning again what many people have reported, which is that a food that tastes vile on the first mouthful, if you stick with it, by the 3rd or the 4th mouthful, you'll think, I can eat that. So do give that a try. I know it's tough. It's like jumping into cold water, but you know, once you're in and you acclimatize, it feels a little bit better.
We've got a comment here, more someone who's improving here, just saying, good point about changes in taste. 2 months ago was the last time I had a taste of beer, which was revolting. Last weekend, I thought I would try again, and this time the beer tasted of a mixture of beer, bitter, mixed with rose petals and raw onions. May not be a great taste overall, but definitely different and improving. So.
Fantastic. There you go.
Yeah.
And then we have did you want to say something there, Duika?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to suggest that this is the idea when we talk about a new normal, that some things may come back to exactly how you anticipate them to be, and some things may not. And a lot of what we know about food is a lot of why we like what we like is about anticipating it tasting of something in particular. So when you've experienced parosmia and you're starting to come out the other side, you may have certain flavors and tastes that don't come back completely as you remember them. But I think this is part of the brain cognitive work. We're going to talk about this, that you need to be doing, is coming to accept new normals, new ways of engaging with food. But we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on, I think, Chrissi.
Joy here asks, is there a phase where a person feels that the disgusting smell is different, but still disgusting?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. Does the disgustingness change and shift? And we've been working on a paper recently where we talk about COVID smells rather than the COVID smell, but the COVID smells, because people seem to find that disgustingness can vary over time, or you might have a more a sort of faint COVID smell or a more chemically COVID smell. So yes, I certainly think that the parosmia experiences can shift and change over time as well. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Mm. Any more questions, Aidan? Oh, you've muted yourself.
Yep, so here, someone asks, why do you think some people develop it, parosmia? It's a more general question.
Right, well, we are going to be having another webinar in 2 weeks with Dr. Jane Parker and ENT Mr. Simon Gain from the Royal National Throat, Nose and Ear Hospital. So we will be getting to those technicalities in 2 weeks. I think it's best to ask the experts on that. I mean, Duika and I both know roughly what it's about. We're talking about receptors which are not delivering complete message to the brain. But if you want more detail on why that is, do tune in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, don't want to spoil anything too soon, do we? We've got someone here asking, in chronic pain treatment, there is a tool called Pain Journal, typically used in specific scales. Is there anything similar published on olfactory disturbances?
Ooh. Well, I mean, I've been advocating for people to use a journal ever since 2015. And that was part of my sort of recovery and discovery also of how my sense of smell was kind of coming back. And I do think it's a really interesting exercise. It will help you see how things are changing and how things are especially with COVID-19, where there seem to be so many fluctuations. So I'm definitely in favor of keeping a diary. Yeah, but I mean, we don't have any, that has not been formalized. There's no reason.
Not that I'm aware of. And I certainly think when we look at the literature, I notice it's from a doctor to the audience, but when we look at the literature on parosmia, there's been a lot written about anosmia, but there's so much less when it comes to parosmia. So I think we've got a lot of work to do as researchers and people involved on that side to try and come up with those sorts of tools and scales to do some of this work. So thank you for the suggestion. I'll put that one in my to-do list.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Aidan.
Sorry. Is cognitive behavioral therapy useful for coping with smell disturbance?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know of any research on that, but I think it probably would be worthwhile investigating. You know, I do think that the anxiety that people experience in having to deal with food, not just for themselves, but at meal times. You know, one of the points we have on our list today is about the sort of social interactions that go along with meal times. Very important aspect of food. I mean, it's not just about the calories on the plate. It's about the experience of being with other people. If you're in a caregiver function of feeding someone, obviously we're still hunter-gatherers. We've got to go out to Sainsbury's and fill the shopping trolley. So there are many aspects of food that have been altered. And when every one of those phases fills you with such dread that you're on the verge of a panic attack, there needs to be an intervention. So I should think that something like CBT is a good solution and certainly worth a try.
Yeah, and certainly we, a few weeks ago, we had Vincent Deary on, who is a CBT therapist, and he was certainly using some of those techniques, I think, in thinking this through. I think it'll, in the US, I'm not sure what's going to happen, but certainly in the UK, there's been a lot of talk about setting up clinics for people who are experiencing longer term effects with COVID-19 or long COVID. And I'm very much hoping that CBT and those sorts of therapies will be part of that, so that people will have access to those sorts of therapies. And, you know, the thing about us, that smell loss is so much of it goes on in our brain. I mean, it's a relationship between our brain and our physical senses in such an important way that, that our mental health is so much part of this picture. And also our mental engagement with food is so much part of this picture. So it's a really good point. I think certainly CBT will be, and psychological therapies in general will be really useful for helping you come to terms with it.
So if you have questions for us or comments, do put them into the Q&A bar, which is one of the buttons down on the bottom, not in the chat bar. So Aidan, tell me, I see we've got more questions, so give us another one.
Sure we do. Yeah, Sonal here asked, does it get worse before it gets better? I've noticed things have really worsened for me over the last week, and I understand from reading online and the Facebook group that it could be a sign of nerve regeneration. How long does it take to go through this really bad phase?
Well, thank you for your question. I would say that, again, that's something that maybe we should speak to Simon about in 2 weeks, but in general, I know that parosmia is considered part of the recovery phase. Thomas Hummel, who was here a couple of months ago, sat right there where you could have seen him, and he said his opinion on this is that if you have parosmia, you are very likely to recover. So it is a phase that is turning out to be quite long for some of the people that have COVID-19. But I think it's, you know, it will take time. You know, we're people who lost their sense of smell in February are still experiencing parosmia. So I think we can safely say minimum, maybe, you know, 9 months, 10 months, a year, even more than that. It is certainly not uncommon for people to have a certain amount of parosmia for a couple of years. So, you know, you've got to, it's really important for you to keep smell training, Sunil. I do hope you're doing that. That will not help the parosmia specifically, but it will hasten the process of recovery from everything that we know about smell training. So I think you should be ready for a long haul. And I certainly hope that for you, the critical phase is blessedly short. Next question.
Yeah, Bridget here says, I feel so bad if people have prepared food or are wearing perfume that makes me so revolted. I struggle not to gag or grimace.
Oh.
I don't want to alienate friends or end up just isolating myself. Is there some way that this could be made more understood in the media so that people don't think I'm being rude or being a princess?
Oh. Yeah. Duika, do you want to speak to that?
I just feel for you so much, and it's a really difficult thing for other people to understand. It's really not until you've been through something like parosmia that you can explain it to somebody, or you can experience it. I mean, we've got some videos here, a slightly humorous aside perhaps, but I'm giving a workshop in a couple of weeks for acquired brain injury for dietitians and various other people working with acquired brain injury, and I'm going to be feeding them all durian lollies. Now, durian is a Southeast Asian fruit that divides people quite dramatically. It's got a very powerful aroma that can really, if you go online and look for durian kittens.
Yeah, they gag, don't they?
You know, have you seen this, Aidan?
I've seen it.
They're very funny.
Gag.
Yes, they gag and they start digging holes with their little paws trying to bury it because it smells so revolting. And I suspect it might be a little bit like the parosmia experience. If you can find some durian cookies at your local Thai, Chinese or Southeast Asian grocery somewhere near you, and feed them to the person who is not listening to you, that may be a way of them having some understanding of what it's like to live with parosmia. But it's really difficult to get across to other people, and somehow I think one of the things that's quite helpful for me, having worked in this area for years, is that there are so many people who now understand it so much better. So you have got a community of people that gets it. Yeah. And if you're not part of the AbScent Parosmia and Phantosmia Facebook group, I would really recommend you join that, because at least you have a community of people who do get your experience there. Yeah. That you can.
And as far as, you know, how do you get yourself out of an awkward social situation? God, I wish I had an answer. I think the most you can do is say, I am so sorry, but I have this condition. which is a result of having COVID-19, and I just can't bear to be in an environment where there is the smell of something that, you know, whether it's perfume or food cooking or whatever it is, and then you're going to have to, for your own mental health, you're going to have to find a way of expressing that and just remove yourself from the situation. Mm-hmm. That's really hard. It's really hard. I'm so sorry. Right. Okay. I think what we're going to do now, Duika, is the time is whizzing by. Let's quickly go through the other things on our list.
Yeah.
And then we can take some more questions at the end. Right. Okay. So one of the things that we've got here is the emotional impact of parosmia. And I mentioned before that, you know, that this is very much a mental health issue. But I also want to stress that losing your sense of smell and being confronted by this awful smell is very much a bereavement process. And you need to just let yourself feel that and not try and fight against it, because it really is perfectly awful. And you should be allowed to kind of own that and not have people say, oh, get over it, or, you know, it's not that bad, or, you know, all those things that people will try and say in order to minimize that. So, you know, let me give you permission to feel as rubbish about this as you need to, because it is very, very difficult to get to grips with. Another thing that we've spoken about in other webinars, Ilona Croy was here not too long ago with Professor Barry Smith, and we talked about the loss of pleasure. And I think that, you know, that the loss of pleasure goes hand in hand with the arrival of this enormously awful, hideous experience that you're getting 24/7. So losing the pleasure of food is also going to drain you. And again, you have to, like any bereavement, you are going to have to sit with that and make your own peace with it while your body is recovering. And then, as we discussed when we had Kim Price with us, and was that last meeting we had? I think it might have been. And Kim is an inspirational person, I think, who lost her sense of smell when she fell off a ladder. And she spoke very movingly about what it was like for her recovery journey, which was long and had a lot of twists and turns, but she spoke about the kind of things that she used to make her feel better. You know, so many of the things that we reach for when we have a healthy nose to make us feel better on a bad day are involved with our sense of smell. So whether it's putting your arms around your loved one, or having a hot bath with something that smells nice, or a cup of tea, or sitting down in front of a fire, all those things have olfactory cues that add to your level of comfort. And when you don't have that, then what are the things that you can use? And Kim spoke about music, about being in the out of doors, about enjoying nature. And I think those are really, really important points. There are other ways for you to experience pleasure that are not necessarily olfactory based. If you're interested in hearing more about Kim or reading more, we have a blog up on our website at abscent.org. You can read a sort of a précis, we wrote up an article based on what she said in that webinar. And of course, many of our other webinars have been also captured in a blog that you can in a post in the blog that you can take a look at. Right. Oh dear, we have 11 questions. Quickly, let's take 3 quick questions. Aidan, what do you have for us?
Sure. Smell training can be very challenging for parosmia patients. For example, the smell of lemon makes me gag. It's even hard to think of lemon while smelling that. What do you do in such a situation?
Duika, I'm really sorry to be hogging the conversation. But
no, please, this is your area, Chrissy, yeah. This is yours.
If this came up today in the Facebook group, if you find that the thing that you're supposed to be smell training with is making you gag, then go out there and find something that won't make you gag. You know, you just keep trying, just keep looking. It doesn't have to be an essential oil. Maybe it's your bar of soap. Maybe it's something else entirely, a box of crayons. It could be anything that stimulates your sense of smell. And that's a very important message about smell training. It's not about the essential oils. It's about stimulating your sense of smell. And it could be anything, as long as your sense of smell is stimulated. And when you approach whatever that thing is to try and have a sniff, that you can concentrate your mind and try and receive a smell message from it. So don't be put off if the essential oils don't work for you. You have to just keep looking for something that you can use, and keep trying, because go back to the lemon in a couple of weeks, you might find it's better.
We have a question here. I've been using a nasal spray, steroid, which I feel is heightening my parosmia. I'm continuing with it and hope it will accelerate recovery. Is this a common experience when using steroid sprays?
I would, again, that is a question for Simon, but in 2 weeks, but I think I would say that parosmia is something that happens in many cases, and you might be using steroid sprays and you might be getting parosmia, but the two might not have anything to do with one another. I think it's much more likely that your level of parosmia is just increasing as you recover, and that this arrival of parosmia has nothing to do with the nasal sprays. So I'd be very skeptical of that. Anything else?
Robin here asks, I've had no taste or smell since March. 2 months ago, any meat or eggs were totally unpalatable. Until recently, I have dealt with this rather well. However, I'm become very depressed and fed up. My husband encourages me to eat to make sure I have something, but I have no motivation. How can I get out of this slump?
Duika, what do you reckon?
I mean, this is why we're here, I think. It is a slump and it is a difficult thing. I think in a sense, it would be really helpful, Chrissi, if we started to go through some of the
Yes.
hints and tips that we've got, so
Okay.
that there are things that you can start, in a sense, shifting your mental attitude into a different place that enables you to kind of not quite treat this as a challenge, but if you can shift your thinking, it can really be helpful. And I will say this word a million times to people with parosmia: curiosity, curiosity, curiosity. If you can develop a sense of curiosity about your experience, become the expert of your own experience, become a sensory detective, and start to really, in a way, get interested in what's happening to you, it becomes a lot easier to deal with mentally and emotionally as well. And I think, Chrissi, you've said this as well, that for you, that developing of curiosity is such an important skill and strategy that you need to be able to deal with parosmia.
Yeah.
So perhaps we should sort of move on and talk about some of those strategies to make it, particularly food and eating,
Right.
a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, because some of the questions are quite quite like that. So I think it might be quite good.
So let's talk about the bland and bold strategy. So Duika, why don't you describe what that is and how anyone who's listening might employ that strategy to find a better way of achieving a balanced diet.
Okay, so we came up with this idea of the bland and bold strategy because what we know about parosmia, and to go back to the definition of what it is, it's triggered by an odor. So if you can find foods that don't have strong odors and have them as your bland foods, if you like, the sort of base foods that you can build a meal from, then you have some bland foods that are really helpful. And they might be things that don't give a lot of aroma, things like some people say yogurt, tofu, cheese seems to be reasonably acceptable to a lot of people, potatoes, beans and pulses, mushrooms for some reason seem to be acceptable to a lot of people. So they can be quite bland and used as a base to build a meal on. Then the bold strategy is if you can find things that are almost like masking agents that can cover up some bad smells. So there's quite a few that people have mentioned. So some of them might be particular spices. Cinnamon seems to be a really useful spice for a lot of people. Sometimes a sour flavor like a lemon or a lemon water. A lot of people strangely mentioned olives as being really, really helpful.
Of course, olives are full of umami, and
yep.
Umami is something that you should be able to experience even if you've lost your sense of smell, because it's something that you've got receptors for that in your mouth. So I can really see why a lot of people like olives, and I recommend them.
Okay, so and if it's umami that you can work with, this is one of your taste receptors. Umami is found in things like tomato sauce, Parmesan cheese, soy sauce, and that sort of boosts the overall flavor experience. So if umami is something that you're okay with when you do your check-in in the morning and say, how are my senses today, and umami is working for you, then go off and look up umami and lavish it on everything and see if that helps. So I think again the bold strategy might be that you find something like a lemon water or a mint or a cinnamon or something like that you can
or what about chili, for instance,
or a hot sauce.
Hot sauces, or lime pickle, you know, things that are like super sour and super hot and salty and sweet at the same time, you know. So experiment with those. I think that you know,
it's like having you need a little bag to carry around with you that you can sort of bring it out if anybody puts anything in front of you that's difficult, that you can slather on some of your bold strategy. So that can be one strategy, is the bland and the bold. So finding your bland foods and finding something bold that you can mask some of those unpleasant flavors with.
I want to mention we've got a lady who's a member of the Facebook group. She's been in touch with us. Her name is Carol Shadford, and she's a cook herself, a chef, and has parosmia. And she's come up with a sort of ingenious strategy, which she calls portion and proportion. So Duika, why don't you describe a little bit of that, because I think that's a really good one.
Yeah, what Carol's come up with, which I really like, is this idea of a way to play with food safely. So you start with a safe food to get your palate nice and clean before you start. So she has this photo of a big bowl of rice that she finds what I would call a bland food, but she can start with something like that. And then she puts lots of different things in little bowls, in separate bowls. So she doesn't try and mix everything together straight from the beginning, but she rather keeps everything slightly separate, and then has simple spoonfuls with subtle variations, taking bits from each of the bowls. So she's not going to end up with lots of wastage, which I know can be really problematic if you're suffering from parosmia. You end up making a meal and then you can't eat it. So this is a really nice way of sort of experimenting with portion sizes and proportions. And she suggests that you can play with those proportions. So adding a little bit more of that or a little bit more of that. I think it's a really nice strategy and idea, portion and proportion. So playing both with, starting with just small amounts, lots of little bowls. Thinking maybe if you went to one of those really expensive zizzy Michelin star restaurants where they serve you up a plate of food and everything is in tiny portions, and sort of imagining yourself in one of those sorts of situations, but it makes it much easier to just sample things rather than feeling like you have to eat a whole meal of something. So you can play around with it that way. Yep,
good. And then the final one that we have here under sort of the heading of behavioral is avoiding triggers. And that sounds obvious, but it's really important that you understand the classic triggers, which are things like coffee, cooking meat, and of course that's a lot of, it's one food group, but I mean, that's very often meat in every meal. So that can really hamper your experience of being around a kitchen or eating with other people. So meat, obviously, onions, garlic, eggs, peppermint, or toothpaste frequently. So what you want to do is learn your triggers and make sure that you avoid them. Mm-hmm. And, you know, easier said than done, but if you can be very careful about that and also avoid hot food, hot kitchens, and try and eat more room temperature food or cool food, I think you'll find that more palatable than otherwise.
Yeah, and this also sort of ties into a question about going shopping, for example. A supermarket store can be unbearable for a parosmic. So wandering the grocery store can be a very unpleasant experience. So rather than putting yourself in harm's way by putting yourself in an environment that triggers you, buy your groceries online if that's available to you.
Yep.
I know Carol, again, another thing that she sent us some beautiful photos of her outdoor kitchen. So she'd set up a kitchen outside the house so that she could cook, and the smells would dissipate a little bit more than they would if they were in the house. Another person who I've been speaking to says she's banned toasters from the house for the moment. So there may be ways of, you might have to rope in some family members to help with some of those triggers as well.
Mm. Yes, and I mean, we had an earlier question, you know, how can I help my family understand what's going on? You might actually wait for this to be put up on YouTube and sit down and watch with them so that they can understand, you know, just how bad it is. Mm-hmm. Okay, right. What shall we look at next?
Probably the sensory, I think, Chrissi, naturally follows from this.
Yeah.
Some of the sensory strategies that we kind of identified.
Right. Well, then tell us about the sensory strategy.
Well, there are lots of different ones, but we thought it might be nice to highlight a few of them tonight. So texture as one, which we've spoken about a little bit, colour, and then talk about palate cleansers and temperature. So we've got a few things to talk about there. Texture is often one that I've found really useful in the groups that I've worked with. In that, if you think about, and one of my favourite chefs is a wonderful British chef called Fuchsia Dunlop, and she went to China and became a Chinese chef, and she got to understand that in Chinese cuisine, they place a lot more emphasis on texture than we do in most Western cuisine. So if you have a friend who's Chinese, go and talk to them about texture, because sometimes the food that they eat will be much more for the textural experience than it will be for the flavour experience. So if you can adjust your thinking to start experiencing the texture of a food, shift your attention away from looking for flavour or searching for flavour or anticipating flavour, and shift your attention towards experiencing the texture. And that's not just whether it's crunchy or soft, but it can be the variations in size and shape, the nature of the crunch, how it feels when it's moving around your mouth. So this is almost a CBT strategy, actually. So it's shifting, if you want to call it mindfulness, shifting your attention to a different aspect of the food that maybe you weren't highly conscious of before. So that can be a quite helpful strategy. Did you find that useful, Chrissi, when you were?
Oh, absolutely. I became completely hooked on texture. You know, whether it was, for instance, the feel of a toasted pine nut in my mouth in one setting. So with, I don't know, in a salad with goat cheese was a certain kind of perfection, but for another dish, it had to be walnuts. I mean, that's the level to which I got fussy about or paid attention to the texture thing. I mean, of course, in Western cooking, I mean, I think, you know, wherever there's a lot of processed foods, there is a loss of texture. So if you think about fast foods, things like that, it's all meant to be very easily chewable and that kind of thing. So I think people have kind of lost that interest in texture. And for me, I mean, I don't eat a lot of processed food, but certainly after my smell loss, my interest in texture became much greater. Much greater.
Yeah, and I was reading a paper the other day where somebody had compared the terminology for textures across different languages. So there are a lot more words for textural experiences in Mandarin than there are in English, and similarly in Japanese. So if you want to get really curious, you can go off and learn a new language for texture as something that sort of takes the attention somewhere else. The next thing we had on the list was colour, Chrissi.
Yes.
And it reminded me of the classic, whenever we talk about colours, we talk about this Roman gourmand whose name was Apicius, who said, the first taste is always with the eyes. And that the importance of colour and how we anticipate something is going to taste because of the colour that it is, or you know, there've been lots of really interesting research projects that say if you put food on a red plate, it's going to taste slightly sweeter. If you colour something blue, it's going to make you feel a bit revolted by it. But also we know, for example, that there's nutritional value in colour. So all of those kind of beetrooty colours tend to be really high in polyphenols and anti-inflammatories. So there are good reasons to be interested in the colour of food and also the colour of the cutlery to make it a sort of colourful experience. Again, Chrissi, I mean, I'm fascinated because you've been through this, is how much the plating of food and the colour and the preparation of it changed your relationship with it when you had parosmia.
It certainly did. I noticed very quickly that food on a white plate, I mean, unless it was beautifully plated up in a restaurant or something, but when I was just cooking for myself, food on a white plate just didn't work for me. And I don't know where I was that I had food on a black plate. And I thought to myself, yeah, that really interests me. It just looked very appetizing on the black plate. And so I then went over to gray plates. So I have gray plates right now. And I just think it's very, very important to me that when I look at the food, it looks nice. Yeah, but that, I mean, that may be, you know, obviously everyone's different. So, you know, but I do encourage everyone to think about the way the food is on the plate. And when people come into the Facebook groups and they talk about food, we've had a thread recently, people putting up recipes. It's interesting to see the care with which they take, you know, that they take putting a plate together, taking a picture and upload it. And invariably you see these things, you see something that's colorful, that's attractively put together, you know, with a little bit of parsley on top or something. So important. It also shows that you're taking care to make something nice and to be nice to yourself. And that's also such an important part of, you know, making your way out of this bereavement, is to not just beat yourself over the head with how awful it is, but actively try and do something good for yourself. That can be a tough thing to deliver. It's hard to believe we only have 7 minutes left. So let's power through those questions. Aidan, what have you got?
Sure. Andrea says, well, a lot of food, a lot of the trigger is in browning, so meat can be a lot better and tolerable if it's not fried or roasted. Boiling chicken is more tolerable.
Yep. That's exactly right. And this is something that if you want to look it up, it's called the Maillard reaction, and it increases the flavour when you cook things. We don't exactly know, and this is the work that Jane's doing with Chrissi, doing the research and trying to understand what the different odour molecules are that tend to trigger parosmia more than others. But certainly, I mean, we've done workshops with people with parosmia in the difference between a white stock and a brown stock. So with a brown stock, you cook the meat in the oven first, and it increases the flavour profile so much that for somebody who has parosmia, that's almost inedible. Whereas a white stock that is just cooked without that browning of the meat process, it can be a lot more tolerable. So being aware that any kind of burning, cooking processes like that are likely to increase the flavour profile and the volatiles, the aroma volatile. So that's going to make it more difficult.
Yep. So I would say, gently poached chicken, steamed fish, that's two ways of getting around the problems of, the browning reaction. I mean, considering how horrible roast chicken is, I mean, chicken is just like the numero uno of bad, parosmic triggers. But a cold poached chicken, let's say in a sandwich, is not so much of a problem. So for those of you who are just thinking, oh my God, I can't eat chicken, do try that. Try cold sliced chicken with no brown skin on it or anything like that. Right, Aidan, next one.
Yeah, Agatha asks, so there is no point in exposing ourselves to the triggers to teach the brain that it's something normal and get used to, so that eventually maybe it goes away? That's actually quite an interesting question, yeah.
It's a very good question.
We don't know the answer to that question.
We don't. And I think it's the question about beating yourself up and challenging yourself. And there's a difference. And I think one needs to have a really, really strong focus on looking after you. And if you want to challenge yourself, that's great. Do it in little bits, but be kind to yourself. That's kind of like key, I think.
Yep. Thank you, Agata. So, okay, next one.
I noticed that the water at my parents' house is unbearable to even smell. They have a water softener. If I haven't had realised it was the water, I would have assumed that all the food prepared with water or rinsed with water was the culprit. Might be worth mentioning to people. I think water is something before, remember, Chrissi?
Yes.
People were saying.
Yeah, we talked about that in the other webinar, didn't we? That water can contain, again, if you think about it like this, that when your nerves are regenerating, they become highly sensitive to the most potent odors. So water is not without odors. And in fact, it's full of different things that are likely to give off an odor that we may become so familiar with we don't even notice it. But when you have parosmia, you might notice it. So the suggestion for water is get yourself a water filter. There are three ways you can do it. You can very simply put the water in a jug and just leave it sitting on the side for a while so that some of those odor molecules will disappear. You can get yourself a charcoal water filter that isn't very expensive, or you can get yourself a really expensive water filter for the whole house that's going to do your shower and your bath and everything. I know some people find showering difficult, for example. So there are different levels that you can do with that, but water is not without an odor. So that's the thing to be appreciative of. So when you go to somebody else's house, you may find that the water quality there is a little bit different.
Aidan?
We have someone here asked, well, more just as an end statement. No question, but a great compliment from a big fan in the Netherlands. Great how you've created a structure for people who have to cope with parosmia. And this is someone from the Dutch Smell Disorder Association. So, yeah, that was nice to hear.
So we look forward to sharing more with you as time goes on. Okay. Anything else, Aidan?
Just quickly, is there a way to know if it's parosmia or if it's a phantom smell?
Well, a phantom smell is a smell message that you're receiving in the absence of anything in the environment. So it's originating in your brain. So probably the best way of finding out whether that's the case is to have somebody ask somebody whether they experience a smell. As Duika just said, as we recover, if someone who has parosmia is going to be extremely sensitive to maybe even low levels of a certain compound that is triggering them. So, it's possible that a background odor in someone's house, I don't know, maybe it's the wood polish, the floor polish, or some other, the smell of the fabric softener or something like that, may well be a trigger, but be at such low levels. But I think you would probably be able to work that out by asking someone that's with you whether, it's the smell that you smell is essentially coming from inside your brain, or whether it's something that's in the environment. We will, I think there may be a sort of crossover between parosmia and phantosmia. That there's a third qualitative disorder, which we will hope to talk about maybe in 2 weeks. So tune into that. But yeah, I think the easy answer to your question is ask a friend.
Okay.
Good.
Did we finish on time? This is amazing.
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah,
goodness, we still have unanswered questions. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, anyway, so I suppose I should say thank you very much, first of all, to Aidan for being with us tonight again, and for manning all those questions. And Duika, it's been a pleasure to have you with me tonight. I look forward to all the research that we're going to be doing in the future on finding a way for parosmics to manage their condition, that will help them, you know, adjust to the situation. So I'll see you in 2 weeks. If you are in the Facebook group, do come by and share your experiences. If you're not in any of the Facebook groups yet, do ask to join. We do have member questions, and we ask you to agree to the rules. So if you don't do that, I'm afraid you're automatically booted out, but we would love to have you to join the discussion. So thank you very much for being with us and being part of our community. See you in 2 weeks. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.